Welcome everyone to another lively edition of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, the show that helps your cells sparkle with knowledge they never knew they craved. I'm Ethan Foster, your faithful observer of everything that goes on around us, especially if it involves a good cup of tea.
And I'm Alara Sky, here to serve a healthy pour of sharp commentary and comedic jabs. Think of me as the bergamot in your Earl Grey, slightly zesty, definitely pungent, and guaranteed to wake you up.
Well, that is an image I wasn't expecting, you swirling around in my tea mug. But I guess I'll take it. Now, I hear today's episode could make a few people reconsider their tea stash, especially if they're fans of Earl Grey. If that's you, brace yourself. We're diving into findings that, some might say, give a whole new meaning to forever tea time.
You're referring, of course, to the presence of PFAS, known as forever chemicals, in Earl Grey tea leaves and tea bags. These chemicals sound like they belong in some futuristic science fiction movie, but they're apparently as real as the tea you steep every morning.
Indeed. So, for those who may be wondering, PFAS? Did I accidentally tune into a chemistry lecture? Let's break it down. PFAS stands for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're a group of chemicals that never quite leave the environment, thus the lovely nickname, forever chemicals. And let's just say, you don't want them crashing your tea party.
Absolutely not. Nobody wrote PFAS on the guest list, but they sneak in anyway, putting themselves on center stage in everything from firefighting foam to industrial surfactants. Now, apparently, they've also found their way into some of the most popular Earl Grey teas. As a devoted tea drinker, I feel personally offended.
You might want to hold on to that feeling a bit longer because the numbers are, how shall I say this politely, alarming. According to the tests from Mama Vashin, 91% of the Earl Grey tea leaves tested showed detectable levels of at least one PFAS compound. That's 11 out of 12 brands. I guess if you ever doubted the universality of tea, PFAS is connecting them all in a brotherly bond.
If someone told me 91% of anything had a suspicious chemical in it, I'd be concerned. But with tea, it feels personal. It's like discovering that your friendly next-door neighbor secretly tosses old tires in your backyard. Not exactly the best surprise.
Let's get specific. The testing uncovered three main PFAS chemicals: PFP, EA, PFOA, and PFHXA. Honestly, they sound like they're missing vowels. But the gist is that each has been associated with potential health risks, from messing with hormones to being classified as carcinogens.
Indeed, PFPEA, PFOA, PFHXA. It's like the weirdest bowl of alphabet soup you've ever slurped, but the aftertaste might make your liver cringe. PFPEA, for one, has been linked to liver problems. PFOA, if you followed any health news, has that big C label from organizations that study carcinogens. And PFHXA apparently disrupts hormones. Wonderful.
Now, tea bags themselves also came under scrutiny. All tested tea bags contained fluorine. That's not entirely shocking, since black tea is known to have fluoride from the soil where it's grown. But still, 33% of those tea bags showed elevated levels of total fluorine above 100 parts per million. It's like tea meets a chemistry set, meets a caution sign.
Possibly. And if you're thinking, but I only drink from the best tea bags, hold that thought. Even if the leaves themselves tested free of PFAS, the tea bag material could still contain some level of fluorine, whether it's from normal fluoride or from PFAS. So it's hard to escape that dynamic duo.
This might make some folks rummage through their pantry, whispering, wait, how can I figure out if my beloved brand is in the clear? Well, we actually do have some brand-specific scoop. One brand, FGO, Organic Earl Grey, stood out. Their tea leaves, at least, showed no detectable PFAS.
They managed to produce the only no PFAS detected gold star. But before the confetti falls, their tea bags themselves still had some detectable fluorine, 17 parts per million. So the brand's not entirely off the hook, but from a PFAS leaf standpoint, they're the champion.
Exactly. Now, for the rest of us who might not buy that brand specifically, let's just say we discovered a wide range of outcomes. Some had quantifiable PFAS levels that you could measure exactly. Others had the dreaded, yes, it's in here, but not high enough to put a number on it, result. And at least 3 landed in the, oh dear, that's definitely PFAS category.
Right. So the lesson might be, none of us is immune to these sneaky, forever chemicals. Short of hosting a tea party on Mars, it appears that PFAS can show up in the leaves or the bags, and we just have to be mindful. And that begs the question, if these chemicals are so widespread, is there any brand or region guaranteed to be squeaky clean?
Good question. The tests gave a partial snapshot, not a complete expose on every tea brand in the galaxy. Because Mamavation only spot-checked 12 of the big players in Earl Grey land, we can't wave a magic wand and say that all others are safe or all others are suspect. But it does raise awareness.
I'd say so. There are also interesting bits about how PFAS gets into the tea in the first place. The leaves might pick it up from the soil or water in certain regions. Or the manufacturing process might inadvertently toss in a dash of PFAS. It's basically like the uninvited cousin who shows up at every wedding reception. But here, it's in your tea.
And ironically, it's not just tea. Studies have shown these chemicals in coffee, certain foods, packaging, and more, but it's striking to see them so commonly in something as historically pure as tea. I mean, tea has a refined image. Victorian parlors, lace doilies, wise sages, and faraway temples. Now we're talking industrial chemicals.
I suppose that's the modern twist. We can have the grand tradition of sipping tea elegantly with pinkies raised, but we're also sipping on PFAS cocktails. Let's see if the pink Y can keep pointing up when faced with that fact.
Good luck to it. So, since we don't want to drown in gloom, perhaps we can remember there are ways to minimize exposure. Different brands have different levels, and apparently, going with loose leaf might mitigate at least part of the risk. Some folks say you can skip the tea bag altogether if it's the bag that's high in the total fluorine.
Exactly. Loose leaf is the rebellious, free-spirited sibling of bagged tea. Who knew it might also be the safer route, at least from a PFAS standpoint? Of course, you still have to check whether the leaves themselves harbor any suspicious chemicals. But it's a start.
Definitely. Plus, as you mentioned, some bags had significantly higher levels of total fluorine, like 200, 300, even over 500 parts per million. That's quite the concentration, especially compared to the single-digit or teens found in other brands. So if your brand is on that high side, you might want to do some reading or switch to a brand with less of a PFAS presence.
Or you might ask your local tea shop if they have FGO or any of those better brands in stock. If not, maybe they can special order for you, or you can resort to online shopping. We are living in a digital age, after all.
Indeed. Let's talk about the health angle for a second. PFAS are known to just hang around in your body and environment, which is where the forever label comes from. That can potentially lead to hormone disruption, immune system interference, and other outcomes nobody wants. We should probably at least keep an eye out.
That's right. Better to be aware than to remain oblivious. On the bright side, the more we learn, the more we can adapt. Knowledge is power, especially knowledge about which tea brand won't blindside your taste buds with a side of unwanted chemicals.
It still amazes me how so many daily items can contain these substances. They show up in non-stick pans, firefighting foams, and water supplies. The fact that they ended up in tea underscores the reality that PFAS contamination is widespread.
True. We can't go around wearing bubble suits, but we can take small steps like choosing safer tea, reading product analyses, and not letting ourselves be lulled into a false sense of security. It's also a testament to how important it is for independent groups to test everyday products and share the info publicly.
Exactly. Kudos to groups like Mama Vashin for shining a spotlight on this. And if you're sitting there feeling a wave of anxiety about every sip, the intent isn't to cause panic. It's just to remind you that awareness can guide better choices.
Precisely. In my mind, it's about navigating modern life with open eyes. One day, you're happily sipping bergamot-infused black tea. The next, you discover you might also be brewing up a batch of short-chain chemical compounds that come from the same family as old-school firefighting foam. But hey, once you know, you can pivot.
People might wonder if the solution is to just avoid Earl Grey altogether, but that's probably excessive. Instead, you might look for the brand that tested free of PFAS in the leaves, or those that only showed the faintest presence.
Right? And if you're concerned about the total fluorine in the tea bag, you can ditch the bag, go for a loose leaf version, or see if they have a paper or plant-based bag that's tested. Some brands are actually quite transparent about their sourcing and packaging these days.
Good point. Let's not forget the detail that even if the leaves are squeaky clean, the bag might add some extra chemicals to the party. So, if you're a daily tea drinker, maybe consider a decent infuser. They're not that expensive, and you'll feel like a tea connoisseur.
Precisely. And for those who still want to swirl a tea bag in the mug, at least keep an eye on the brand's track record. If it had extremely high levels of fluorine, that's worth a second thought. Maybe it's time for some brand loyalty to shift.
Another interesting point is that some folks drink multiple cups of tea a day, believing they're on a saintly health path. It can be a healthy habit, except if you're doubling or tripling your exposure to certain chemicals. So, as always, everything in moderation, plus a dash of brand awareness.
Yes, I suppose the old, too much of a good thing can be questionable applies here. Then again, if you're picking a brand that's tested lower, maybe your daily brew is less of a hazard. I just like to picture these PFAS molecules standing outside, holding a sign that says, "We want in," and you, politely declining them entry.
That's quite the mental image. In the world of comedic spins, we can always anthropomorphize the chemicals as wily party crashers. The short-chain PFAS might say, hey, we're the new generation, less studied, but still persistent. Meanwhile, the old guard like PFOA is looming in the background. Not a party I want to attend.
Nor me. Maybe that's our real mission. We shine the comedic light on these chemicals so folks remember the name. If it sounds like an incomplete acronym full of consonants, it might be trouble. PFPEA, PFOA, PFHXA, they're all lurking around, looking for unsuspecting guests.
Now, about solutions. Some suggest installing a robust water filter at home, especially in regions known to have PFAS in the supply. Others say you should switch to teas that come from areas with stricter regulations. The more you know, the better you can handle it.
Indeed. And if all else fails, maybe try your hand at homemade herbal infusions, like fresh mint or lemon balm from your backyard, provided you haven't fertilized the soil with something suspicious. But still, fresh herbs in hot water might give you a break from PFAS-laden black tea.
True. Let's also address something that came up in the analysis. For those who see big brand names on these test results, it doesn't automatically mean everything that brand produces is contaminated across the board. It's a spot check, but it's definitely a reason to stay alert.
Exactly. One product from a brand might be tested, so we can't say the entire line is the same. But we can say, I might want to do a little more research, or maybe contact them about their PFAS policies. Some companies respond quite openly to consumer inquiries.
That's a nice direction, because if we, the consumers, ask questions, sometimes companies realize we want transparency. Then they might revisit their sourcing, test more frequently, or switch packaging. It's a slow process, but it can happen.
We can all play a tiny role in encouraging better standards, one tea bag at a time. Think of it as activism in your mug. You swirl it, you sip it, you enjoy it, and you also hold it to a higher standard than mystery bag of who knows what.
I like that. Activism in your mug. It sums up the modern era well. We want that calm, aromatic ritual, but we also want accountability for what's inside. Because if we've learned anything from this conversation, it's that the simplest pleasures can be complicated by hidden chemicals.
Right? The next time someone says, care for a spot of tea? I might reply, only if it's not laced with PFPEA or a dash of PFOA. That might make me sound fussy, but hey, we've got to look out for ourselves.
And hey, no shame in that. Some people scrutinize every ingredient in their cooking. Why not do the same for your tea?
Precisely. After all, we do it for everything else, from shampoo to cookware. It's only fair that tea, that centuries-old staple, deserves the same scrutiny, especially now that we know it's not immune to modern chemical infiltration.
So, to wrap up, here's the simple takeaway. If you love Earl Grey, you can still enjoy it, but you might want to check the brand's track record, consider going loose leaf, and pay attention to which chemicals appear in the leaves or the tea bag. It's a way to balance pleasure with precaution.
Well said. We're not anti-tea, far from it. We're pro-transparency, pro-aware consumer, and definitely pro-brew a cup that won't haunt you. We believe in that final category wholeheartedly.
Yes, indeed. Everyone, that does it for today's edition of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. Remember, your cells deserve the best, and that includes a nice, clean cup of Earl Grey when you want it. Thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next time for more of our comedic dive into all things health and wellness, minus the extra acronyms floating in your mug. Until then, steep wisely and keep those taste buds and your cells happy.